Hi, I'm Ms. Roz. Today we're going to make cinnamon raisin bread. So I'm going to show you how to make the bread first, and then we're actually going to talk about using it to make French toast. The French toast part is optional, but if you want to do something with your bread, this is one thing that you can do. So let's start off with making the dough first. So what I need for today is I need about 3.5 cups worth of flour. I need about a quarter cup of some regular sugar, a half a tablespoon of some salt. Remember that there's 3 teaspoons in 1 tablespoon, so a half a tablespoon would also equal 1.5 teaspoons. And then I also need my yeast, which is about 2 teaspoons or 1 full packet if you have the packet. And then I also need warm water and 1 cup of warm water and 2 tablespoons of oil. So this should be at somewhere around 120 degrees, somewhere around there, 115, 120. So generally speaking, if you don't have a thermometer, I like to kind of put my hand around it, and it should feel like a nice hot cup of coffee, or hot cocoa, something along those lines. All right. So when we go to make this recipe, right, we're going to I'm actually going to do the quick mix method, and I'm also going to do it by hand just so that you can see how it's done since the last time we did it in a stand mixer, and we did the conventional method. All right, so what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to put about a half a cup or so of flour in my big bowl. All right, I'm going to also toss in my yeast, my salt, and then my sugar. All right. And then I'm just going to take a wire whisk, mix this around, right? And then I'm going to actually add my my water. Notice I didn't add a lot of flour because if you remember when we did the conventional method, I always wanted to make sure that I get this nice and smooth first, the base of this. So this is kind of how you do it by hand. You just add a little flour now, and then we will actually add more in a little bit. So because this is still pretty wet, I'm actually going to use my wire whisk, okay, just to make sure that we break up all those clumps. All right, and mix it up really well. All right, and then what I want to do is I'm going to then also add in a little more flour until we start getting more of like a cake consistency, cake batter consistency, if you remember from the conventional method. So toss in another about half a cup and mix this around as well. All right. Like I said, you want to kind of keep it nice and smooth if you can. All right, and then keep adding flour. All right, you may or may not use all 3.25 cups of that flour, which is perfectly fine. But we'll see kind of how it works out. Right, as it comes together and it gets a little thicker, I'm going to change over from my wire whisk to my rubber scraper so that the dough doesn't get caught in my wire whisk. All right, so it's starting to look good. All right, so add a little more flour here, and then I'm going to use my rubber scraper and mix this around. Okay, so it should come together in a nice dough ball. All right, make sure you scrape those sides. Right, and because this is yeast bread, it's fine to, mix it vigorously. Right. Also, and I forgot to point this out before I started. You might have noticed I'm wearing an apron today. When I do yeast bread by hand like this, I tend to wear an apron because it does get a little messy. Flour might kind of fly around a little, so I like to make sure that I'm covered and I'm not going to get all my clothes all dirty. All right, so here we go. So now it's nice coming together. This is going to be a nice soft dough, unlike the bagel. Right, those bagels were a nice stiff dough. This one's going to be nice and soft to work with. All right, so once I get this in, I'm going to actually start to knead it on the counter, and I'll use that remaining flour that I have to knead with. All right, so obviously I don't want it too sticky, but I don't want it tough either. All right, so as we knead this more, right, it should start to get a little softer, right? So I'm just going to put this out on my counter. Like so. Right, and this is where I'm going to roll up my sleeves, right, and get in there. So I know that there's some flour already here, but I do still have a little extra flour in my bowl if I need it. Right, so hand kneading, right, you're kind of just stretching it and folding, stretching, folding. All right, good. So this you will do for about 8 to 10 minutes by hand. Right, and so then after that, you'll put it either in a bowl if you're going to plan on finishing up the recipe after a couple of hours. Go ahead and put it in a greased bowl. If you know you can't use it for a few hours, you might have to use it next tomorrow or later on this evening. I would put it into a plastic bag and just put it in the refrigerator and let it just slowly rise that way. Right? But keep on kneading it. Right? Like I said, the more you knead it, the softer it's going to get. Right? You want that dough ball to look smooth and glossy, right, when it's finished. So I'm going to just keep kneading this as we go, and I will see you back here in about 8 to 10 minutes after I've been kneading this for a while. All right, see you then. So I have been kneading for about 8 to 10 minutes, so I think my dough ball is ready. You want to look at the dough ball, right? It's nice and smooth. It's kind of on the glossy side. It's not dull, right? And so that's how I think I know it's ready. One other way to tell that this is ready is just to take some of your dough, all right, and see if you can kind of stretch it a little and see if you can get that kind of window pane. See if it gets kind of translucent when you pull it apart without it all coming apart. So as I'm looking at it, I can definitely get that window pane. So my dough is ready, right? So with that being said, I'm going to get out my my bowl. Right now, I'm going to spray my bowl, right, and put my my dough ball in here, and then I'm just going to cover it so that when it does rise, it does not stick to everything, right? And then I'm just going to throw some saran wrap on top of it. Now, if you are not able to work with this dough within the next couple of hours, that is perfectly fine. But what you should do is, so if you can't work with it maybe until tomorrow or so, or like maybe later tonight, what you can do is you can actually put your dough in the refrigerator, and it will rise slowly in the refrigerator. And then before you want to use it, I would just take it out of the refrigerator and just let it rise. Let it kind of come to room temperature, and it will do the final rising of it in that like 20 minutes, half hour of it coming back to room temperature, and then you can work with it, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and let this guy hang out and rise, and then I will see you back here in about 2 hours to roll it out and get it into cinnamon rolls. All right, see you guys later. Alright, here we are back at the cinnamon raisin bread and rolling it out. So you should let your dough rise for about 2 hours out on the counter, or less than 24 hours in the refrigerator. So I had mine in the refrigerator. If it was, I would leave it out for like, about 20 minutes, half hour, let it come to room temperature before using it. I tend to find that it works better when it's a little on the warmer side, right? So I'm just getting mine out of my bag, right? And then I'm going to work with it on the counter, right? So this is cinnamon raisin bread. You will notice that we haven't actually put the raisins into the dough yet, right? So what I want to do is I want to knead those raisins into there, right? So I'm going to just do this right directly on my counter, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sprinkle a little flour down first, just so that it doesn't stick, right? Not too much, because you don't want it to, affect the dough here, right? But what I'm going to do is, so just kind of stretch out my dough a little here, right? My dough is still a little sticky, which is fine. But I'm going to put in raisins, right? So I need about between a quarter cup to half a cup of raisins. If you like lots of raisins, I would go for half a cup. If you're not as into the raisins, then that's fine as well. And then I also have a quarter cup of some sugar, and then a teaspoon and a half or a half a tablespoon of some of the cinnamon, right? So I'm just going to put in, about half those raisins into this dough, right, first, right, and kind of disperse them around, right, and then I'm going to actually roll up this dough, right, and I'm going to just knead the dough a little. Disperse some of those raisins throughout the dough, right? So if those raisins start to pop out through the dough, that's perfectly fine, right? But I still have more raisins, so what I'm going to do is, right, I'm going to just stretch this out one more time and add the remaining of those raisins. I personally like lots of raisins, so I chose to do closer to a half a cup of the raisins, right? All right. So, and then just roll this up again. Right, and then again, knead it a little to get those raisins dispersed throughout. Right, if it's sticking to your hands, just add a little flour to your hands. Right, so it shouldn't be sticking to the counter though. All right, and so now my raisins are nice and mixed in to the dough. All right, so now what I need to do is we need to roll it out. So again, kind of get some flour down, right? And generally speaking, when rolling out dough, right, you want it to start it out in the shape that you want it to end up in, right? So if I want it to end up in a rectangle, then I probably should start it out in a rectangle. All right, so flip it over a little just to make sure again it's not too bad here. Okay, so I'm going to use my rolling pin, right, and roll it out. Right, like I said, try to get it into the best of a rectangle as possible. Right, now, if you roll out your dough kind of more on the thinner side, meaning this part is kind of thinner and it's much longer, right, you could roll it out and make one big, ginormous roll bread. Okay, or you could make it a lot wider, and then what you could do is you could split it into two, right? I'm going to split mine into two just because I like to share my rolls with people, so I'm going to actually cut it into two pieces so that I can share it with my friends, right? So, right, you'll notice that with yeast dough, it tends to be kind of springy, I guess might be the word. So I tend to have some problems sometimes to get it to stay in the shape that I want it. This one actually is working pretty well for me today. But just roll it out the best that you can. Okay. And so you want the directions say, and I believe I said it says 18 by 9, right? So 9 inches would be kind of the shorter the one where I would want to do it individual, right? If I want to do a double and make 2 rolls at once, I would probably do closer to like maybe 18 by 12, all right? All right, so like I said, try to get it to stay into a rectangle as best as possible. I know sometimes it springs back a little. All right. All right, and then I have the cinnamon and sugar, right? So I'm going to mix this around first, right? And then we're going to sprinkle this all around on the inside and coat the inside of this dough here, right? So sprinkle a little, right, around. Right, and then I also like to make sure that I don't neglect the edges of here. Right, up here as well. Right, and then obviously the other ends here. Right, and then we're actually going to use this spoon to kind of if you have any like clumps of sugar, that's okay, just break them up a little. Right, and then just use your spoon to kind of spread this out evenly. Onto your dough. All right, so we're spreading both ways. Okay, that long way, but then this shorter way here. All right, just to make it so that it's a little more even in sugar and cinnamon. There we go. All right. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll it up. So I'm going to roll it up from the short side, right? So carefully just roll this up, like so. All right. All right, so now I have this big long roll. Okay, and what I want to do is I'm just going to kind of close up the edges here a little on both ends, if I can. All right, and then what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to cut this in half. Like I said, I wanted 2 rolls. All right, so cut this part in half, and then do the same if you can try to seal up the ends on that side as well. So now you have 2 mini rolls here. Although after they rise a little, they will not be mini anymore. So, all right, and so what I'm going to do is put them out on a cookie sheet here. Right. Before I put them on here, I'm going to actually put a little tin foil down just so that they don't stick as much. Right. It also makes cleaning up much easier. So just put down some tin foil here. Okay. Now it tells you to brush some butter or brush some oil on it because it'll help with the browning, which is perfectly fine. And actually, I find that an easy way to do that is actually just to spray it with some cooking spray. All right, so I'm going to just take my cooking spray. All right, and spray it. All right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually let it sit and rise for about an hour. Right, now be sure to cover them so that they don't dry out. Right, so I'm just going to use one of these. Right, and just cover this one, and then I'm going to just grab a little more and cover the other one. And these should almost double in size before you bake it. All right, so oops. So go ahead and just cover this one as well. All right, it's okay if it sticks a little because there's that oil, so it won't really necessarily stick. All right, and then I'm going to just let these rise for about an hour, right? Or they're going to kind of almost double in size. All right, so I'm going to just leave this out on the counter. Okay, after we had shaped our dough and let it set to rise and double, you're going to put it into the oven. So you want to bake it at 350 for about 25 minutes. The smaller loaves, so if you cut the loaf and made 2 smaller loaves, that's going to be about 25 to 30 minutes. If you did the big loaf in the large loaf pan, that would probably be about 35 to 40 minutes. All right, so bake those off, and then when you're done, they should be ready to go. Just remember that the warmer the bread is, the harder it is to cut, so you might want to let it cool down a little before cutting directly into it. All right, thank you. So that is cinnamon raisin bread. And when you're finished with it, right, these are already wrapped already, but this is kind of what it looks like if it's the free form, right? So this was like one of those individual ones, right? So you can actually see the difference. Let me bring it over here. The difference in size, right? Oops, there we go. How it starts out, right? And then after it puffs up and bakes, it really does almost double in size, okay? So that's how you do it. Now, if you have the loaf pan, you can you can do it that way as well. So a loaf pan looks like this one. Okay, oh, and then you could just put it directly, that big giant one, into the loaf pan, and it would expand within the pan itself. Okay, so that's another option as well. All right, so I hope you enjoyed cinnamon raisin bread, and I will see you next time. Good morning. So we have baked off the cinnamon raisin bread, and so I had told you guys you could do whatever you want, but I did want to show you real quick how to do this with French toast. Right. So ingredients that you need: I need some butter. Right. So the butter is going to be used for the pan. I need a teaspoon of some cinnamon and a 1/4 teaspoon of some nutmeg, and then a 1/4 cup of some milk, and then 4 eggs. Right, so I'm going to actually mix everything into the liquid measuring cup. However, I do need a shallow dish to be able to dunk my bread into. So I typically like to use a pie plate because it gives me the sides to hold all the liquid, but it's not too deep that it's hard to get my bread out of. So just cracking open those eggs. Right, so I need right. So I'm going to mix this together first. All right, you can also throw in a little vanilla if you like it a little sweeter. So about a 1/2 teaspoon or so of some vanilla. Mix this all together so it's nice and, what we say, homogeneous, all the same color. All right, and then I'm going to pour this into my pie plate. Just trying to make sure I'm breaking up all the yolk. All right, so pour it in. All right, and then I'm going to just sprinkle this around. All right, and let that mix together as well. All right, and then I have my bread here, right? So this is, I had actually eaten a little of it because it was so tasty, but you can see the cinnamon swirl in there for it. And then I'm going to actually use my serrated knife, so the one that has the little waves at the bottom, right? And I'm going to cut a couple of slices. Now the thing you want to kind of pay attention to is how much liquid you're absorbing, right? You don't want to over-absorb too much liquid and end up with like super soggy bread, right? So what I'm going to do is put some butter on here. So instead of, that's what the butter is for, is to kind of let it cook in butter instead of some cooking spray. If you don't want to use the butter, you don't have to. It just gives some good flavoring for it. All right, so stick my bread in, all right, let it soak up here, and then turn it over, let it soak up there. Right, and then just let it all run off first before you put it into the pan. So there's one. All right, And then there's the second one. So then you just let it cook for about 2 minutes or so on each side. Okay. And then you'll flip it over, let it cook on the other side, and it'll be nice and tasty and ready for you to enjoy. You can decide on whether or not you want some maple syrup or not. I don't think that you necessarily do because I think it's kind of sweet enough as it is with all the sugar in the actual bread and then also the syrup and everything else. So, all right, so I hope you enjoy this, and I will see you later. Thank you so much for watching.